Hello, in this tutorial we will talk about implementing allocations in Power BI. In the interest of time, I will try to keep it as brief as possible and I will not be creating things on the fly. We will be reusing the pre-existing calculations in this desktop file, and I will post the link to the desktop file used in this tutorial as well as the link to the blog that will detail some of these calculations in the description of this video. To give you a background on what we will be talking about, we will first take a look at the data set and see how the data set might be laid out. This will be a sort of a finance data set. And then after we review the data set, we will talk about how you might create a report where here we have kind of high level modified P&L where I'm looking at different time frames, divisions, and products, sales, expense, margin percent. I'm looking at my headquarter expenses that I would like to allocate to various divisions and various products. So here we're able to look at it in the original fashion where I do see my headquarter expense, $1,000. And what I want to do is, so from here I have product Blue 2 that has profitability 69.99%. What I want to do is I want to allocate that $1,000 to all of the products / divisions in that period, so that when I look at an allocated basis, we see that my margin dropped from 69% to 66%. So if that's the kind of challenge you're trying to figure out how to solve, then hopefully by the end of this video you will be well equipped to tackle that challenge. Before I jump in, let's take a look at the data the way it would probably be available for you. So this is a modified data set. In the interest of making this tutorial easier to follow and understand, I simplified it a little bit, but most likely what you will get from your finance department or from SAP or another GL system you might be using is a table that will look very similar to this. It'll have a number of columns. Somewhere there will be a date column. So in this case, I only have two periods, 2020-01 and 2020-02. So that's enough for us to understand what's happening. So I just wanted to make a very simple data set with 18 records or 19 records in them. The next one is going to be a division. It'll be a department, business unit, profit center, whatever you might call. So something that will be either generating expenses or sales for your organization. So in our case, we have three divisions. We have division HQ, headquarters, we have division blue, and we have division orange. And then division blue and orange are our profit centers. So division HQ, headquarters, does not have any products. So all of the transactions booked to that division will have product NA. Division Blue have product Blue 1 and Blue 2. And Division Orange has products Orange 1 and Orange 2. And then the next column is account. So we want to be able to say what kind of transaction is being booked. So in our case, for division, we're booking rent, and that's $1,000 in 2021 in January, and it's $2,000 in February. And then for each division that does generate revenue, we will have sales and cost of sales. So these are basically, so anything that's not sales, we will consider that expenses. And then here we're basically saying that in January, division blue sold this much of product Blue 1, and the cost of revenue or cost of goods sold was this. So we're doing this for every period. We're basically saying what division, what product, what was the sales, and what was the cost of goods sold. So in your case, you will probably have a lot more different accounts, but at the high level, logic will be the same. We have some sort of revenue that's booked to a division. We will have a cost of revenue that's booked to the division, and they will also be booked to a product. And then we will have some corporate expense, rent. It could be rent, it could be cost of software, hardware, bunch of other different things. So that, so it will be the HQ expenses that we'll be allocating to our divisions and products. Okay, let's jump into our logic. So what we're looking at right now is the original data set loaded into Power BI, and I just added a new column. So what we will be doing is we will have the original amount, and we will have amount with allocation. And what we will do is we will adjust all of the expenses in the original amount to be bumped up by a representative share of the amount we're trying to allocate. So in our case, we're allocating rent. So what we will do is in the amount with allocation, we will bump up all of the expense accounts by the appropriate allocated share of rent. And our allocation logic will be based on the sales. So allocation logic in your case could be pretty complex. You could do it based on units, volume, square footage, headcount, and so forth. Again, math will be the same, approach will be the same. In our case, for the sake of simplicity, let's just assume that we're going to take rent from HQ and allocate it down by product and division for appropriate time period. So here I am starting the amount with allocation calculation. There are several things that we will need to pre-calculate before our allocation can take place. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to create the variables with all of the intermediate steps. I'm going to have a bunch of variables here just so that the logic is easier to follow. So we're going to create several intermediate variables. So the first one is current time period, current product, and current division. Basically what we need to know is, as we're going to be allocating that $1,000 in appropriate cells, what we will be doing is we need to know for each cell that we will be doing the allocation, what is the time period, what is the product, and what is the division. You're probably thinking, well, we already know what it is. We could just look it up by using like a logic that I do here. Yes, you're right. Just be patient. It'll make sense in a few minutes once you understand the logic below. So, so the first three variables are very simple. I'm just trying to get current time, current row for time period, product, and division for the current row rather. So the next step is we're going to say, okay, let's figure out what is the amount we're trying to allocate. So what we want to do is we have two rent records for $1,000 and $2,000, and what I want to do is I want to start remembering that this is the amount I'll be allocating. So let's see. So our logic is the following. So we're using a calculate command. So don't forget, we're going to be doing it row by row. So when we are at the second row, we're no longer see the rent account. We're only seeing the sales account. So what I want to be able to do is, as I'm in the second cell, I need to know, okay, for this division, or rather this time series and this division, what would be the amount to allocate? And what I will be allocating, the rent amount, and I created a rent calculation before that just sums up the amount for rent. So here's the rent calculation. We're just summing up the amount where the account is equal to rent. So that should be very straightforward. Okay, so let's go back into our calculation. So first thing we're doing, as I said before, we need to figure out what expense to allocate. In our case, it's just going to be rent. In your case, you might be allocating a bunch of other different accounts. So logic will be the same, but your data might be a little bit different. So let's see if this logic works. So in this case, I'm going to just paste that into the return command and see if this logic works. So what I expect to see is $1,000 for 2001 for January and $2,000 for February, and that's exactly what I see. $1,000 for January and $1,000 for February. Okay, so obviously we're nowhere near close, but now at least I know that as I go cell by cell, I know what amount I will be allocating. Now what I need to know is what is the right share of this amount belongs in each cell. Well, that share will be, and the logic will be the following. As I'm gonna process all of these amounts, what I will do is I will need to reverse the $1,000. So after the allocation, that 1,000 will go away. Okay. With my sales amounts, sales will stay the same because I'm not allocating my cost to sales, so sale will stay the same. And the COGS and basically anything that's not sales or rent, we will add that allocated share of $1,000 or $2,000 to those amounts. So let's follow these steps now. Okay, the next step is for us to know the ratio that we will be using for our allocation. And the ratio is the following. For every row with expenses, we need to figure out what the sales were for this division and this product in this period, and then we need to divide it by the total sales across the whole company for this period. So the first thing that we will do is we will calculate sales in current period. So this will calculate total sales for the entire company in the current period. And let's see if this works. So what this will do, it will put in everywhere we will have 1,000, it will put the sales in the current period. So we see that we had more sales in January, 25,000 for all of those, and then 21,000 we had in February. And the next step is we need to figure out what was the sale for this division and this product in this period. Why is it important? Because we will be allocating COGS, costs. So by the time we're in costs, we need to know what the sales were for this record for COGS. Okay, so now that we're calculating sales in current period, division, product, I just realized I forgot to explain how all of those calculations work. So we're gonna drill into them now. So all of these calculations follow a very similar pattern. So the first thing that we need to do is we use calculate command. So we use it here, in all three of these. And all we need calculate for is because as we're going one row at a time, in order to calculate the total sales in the current period or total current period division sales and product sales, we need to see more than one row at a time. So the calculate command allows us to step out of the current row and take a look at the entire table, which is what we need to do in this case. So we will be summing up all of the amounts where the account is equal sales, because we're trying to find the sales amount. So we will always filter for sales. And the other thing we will be filtering for is whatever my current period is, whatever my current division is, and whatever my current product is. So by me saying filter all GL, I step out of the current row, I'm looking at the entire table, and then I'm going to shrink that table only to the records that correspond to the current period, current division, and current products. So this will give me the sales for the current product, division, and period, even if I am currently in the COGS row. So if I'm in a row where account is equal to COGS, and I'm not seeing what the sales are, this formula will allow me to calculate what the sales are. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to return this variable instead. And now we should be able to see that where COGS are, we're seeing the sales for this COGS record. So you could see that 6737, that's the COGS, that's the sales for here. And then we go for the orange one. We see the sales that correspond to the sales for the orange one for the COGS row. Hope it makes sense. I know it's a little bit confusing, but basically that's what we need to do to have all of these things pre-calculated. And now we can start building out our logic to populate the real amount. So right now we're just using this for debugging purposes to make sure that all these variables are correct. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write a simple switch statement, and we're going to be looking at the whatever the current account is, and then what we're saying is that if the account is rent, then we're no longer going to have rent. We're just going to reverse it. So in our case, we're going to say blank. Okay, so if the account is rent, we're going to say blank. So let's see if this works. So we don't see anything, which is what we expected. Next step is if the account is sales, we're going to keep the same value. We're not doing anything. We're not allocating the rent amount to sales. So we're going to just basically say amount. So let's see if this works. And that works. We could see that rent has been reversed and sales are the same as they were before. 67.37, 67.37, 59.54, 59.54. So now the fun part is, now we're gonna do the actual logic for our allocation. Okay, and now we have our final formula. So if the amount is rent, we're gonna blank it out. We're not gonna have in allocated column anything for rent. If the amount is sales, we're leaving it as is. And if it's not, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the original amount and we're gonna add the allocation to it. And what's the allocation? And we're gonna take the amount to allocate, which is in our case the rent for this period, and we're gonna divide it, multiply it by the division or the ratio of whatever was sold for this period division product, and we're going to divide it by all sales. So basically the portion of the sales for this division / product in this period for all of the sales in this period. So once we do that, we're now going to have everything properly allocated. So let's take a look at this data now. So as we said, with our logic, all of the rent records get reversed, and we could see this here. So every time we see rent, let's filter that out, make it easier for us to follow. So we had two rent records, $2,000 and $1,000, and after the allocation, they're gone, they're wiped out, they're reversed. Then if we look at our sales data, we did not allocate anything to sales, so sales remain exactly the same. And if we look at our COGS data, then we will see that all COGS went up by a little bit. And by how much they went up by the share of the sales for the for this product and division and date relative to all the overall sales by the whole company in this period. So now that the data part is done, we could take a look at our reporting and see if our data makes sense. So now we're looking at our report. I created a bunch of measures for sales, expense, margin percent. I assume you have basic Power BI knowledge and you can create those measures. You can also download the desktop file. Link will be in the description. See what those measures are like. And I will also have these measures created and documented in the blog post. And the blog post will be also linked to it, will be also in the description. So assuming you've created all those measures, now we could see the original data set. In the original data set, we had our sales, no sales for headquarters, and obviously there's no product for headquarters. Then we had expenses. Total overall expenses in 2020 January was 11,778, and that includes this $1,000 rent. The margin was overall 13,580, and then we have a negative margin for headquarters because 0 sales minus expenses will give us minus $1,000, and we don't have a margin percent because we don't have any sales. So let's look at it in an allocated fashion now. So now we're looking in allocated fashion. We see that our headquarter expenses are gone, and then our margins have been adjusted. Now it's hard to remember what the values were before and after, so I'm going to bring both of them in a table so we can compare. So let's look at at what we see here now. So let's see if our logic works. So at a high level, we see that in an allocated, so on the left side is our original data set, on the right side is our allocated data set. So overall, we would not expect the margin, company margin, to change. So in 2001, let me minimize this to make it easier to follow. So in 2001, our total margin was 53.55%, and that total margin stayed the same. But what we did do was we allocated that expense from headquarters now to our divisions. So we have division blue and orange. So we see that our blue division, the original margin was 61%, and now it's changed to 57.5%. And then for our orange division, original margin was 53%, and that got dropped down to 49%. So now we're looking at our margins adjusted for the allocation. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to implement allocations in Power BI. And again, this desktop file will be available and the link will be provided. Feel free to download it. You could see how all of the measures and columns were created, and hopefully it'll make a lot more sense once you've had a chance to play with all those calculations. Hope you found this tutorial informative, and please come back again soon for more videos. Thank you. Bye.